When asked why they decided to cancel such an absolute banger as the Owl House after only 3 seasons, which really was more like 2 seasons and 3 specials, Disney had this to say.
I will be haunted by my actions forever. Hoot hoot!
So today we're ranking every Owl House character from good to evil.
Think I want to play a new game.
Like usual, we'll start with the more pleasant presences in the Boiling Isles. These characters are the good. There were plenty of candidates for the gold, as there often are, but we're giving the top spot to a character we tragically forgot about last time, Flapjack. This little dude was Hunter's palisman, and he spent all of his limited screen time being an absolute goated bird. Initially being accidentally kidnapped by Luce, her quest to return him results in the gang being attacked by the Golden Guard, now better known as Hunter. But Flapjack didn't see this dude as an unwilling war criminal, he saw him for what he was, a kid who was misguided and just needed a real friend to help him come out of his shell. Through constant loyalty and encouragement, Flapjack brought out Hunter's good side, teaching him indirectly how to be a more compassionate person and ultimately becoming his ride or die. Oh, shoot, that was a really poor choice of words, huh? But in the end, Flapjack gave his life to revive Hunter after his body was possessed by Milos, leaving him on the brink of death. So we have a bird who befriended a traumatized child, helped him to find and redeem himself, and gave his life to save him? I don't think there's anything that could keep him from the top spot, honestly. But if there's one character who rivals Flapjack's sheer loyalty, it's the titular Owl House himself, Hootie. Who doesn't love Hootie? What do you mean a lot of people don't love Hootie? How could you hate this absolute legend? Okay, sure, he's clingy and needy and kind of impulsive. You could even say he's annoying, you know, if you want to be mean about it, but we here at Wicked Binge have a strict no Hootie slander policy. He may not have the best grasp on social cues, but you won't find a guy who's more dedicated to his friends than Hootie. Acting as the home security system, he puts himself at risk constantly to keep Ida, King, and Luz safe, and that's not even mentioning the fact that they constantly diss him, from leaving him out of their plans deliberately to drawing on his body despite his discomfort with it. Later on, he builds a genuinely strong friendship with Ida, not before bugging her first, admittedly.
Hootie, you keep finding new and impressive ways to creep me out.
During the Collector's introduction, he takes a hit for her that gets him turned into a cuckoo clock, which might not sound too bad, but I feel the need to highlight that Hootie had no way of knowing he'd even survived that. The man was fully willing to die to protect his best friend, and that's a level of heroism we're not about to discredit. Hootie's worst deed is really just being a bit reckless with his help, for which we only feel the need to give him the Darwin Center Medal. She may be 2 spots lower than last time, but don't be fooled. Luz Noceda isn't any less of an absolute angel as of the finale. Luz is one of the most compassionate, selfless protagonists you'll find in a cartoon, but what makes her stand out in a genre that admittedly has plenty of those is the fact that she's still a realistic person with flaws. Luz is optimistic to a fault, helping whomever she comes across no matter how blatant those red flags can get. She's also impulsive, going out of her way to learn whatever magic she can however she deems best, often resulting in failure to listen to teachers with more experience, jumping into things too quickly and sometimes dragging friends into trouble with her. But the thing about Luz is that's pretty much where her flaws end, which I'd argue is super reasonable for a teenager, morally speaking. First of all, when she does get others around her in trouble, whether it's pushing Willow and Gus too far during their grudge bee training or playing lighthearted pranks on Amity, she owns up to it and never really goes too far off the deep end. As for her good deeds, well, she played a massive role in saving the Boiling Isles from Emperor Belos. I think we as a society need to remind ourselves how impressive it is for a 14-year-old kid to save an entire ecosystem, even if she had plenty of help in the process. She was also one of the first to see the Collector as a scared child rather than a villain, and even temporarily dying to save him. Luz is a top-notch hero and definitely deserves a high spot on our list. Luz may be the main character, but this guy is technically the most important character in the show. Papa Titan, or for those of you who don't have Disney Plus subtitles on, just the Titan. That's right, the Titan, the one whose decomposing body is what formed the Boiling Isles and gave its residents magic in the first place. You wouldn't be blamed for thinking that Titan was some super intimidating force of nature, given how Belos used his fearful image as a means of controlling the island, but it turns out the Titan is just a chill guy, the kind of guy you'd see completely overrun your Facebook feed for weeks on end. Papa Titan was one of the last remaining Titans who defended his people against the Collector, but in the end, he was only able to protect one other, his son, King. In the process, he accidentally took the Collector we're familiar with into the in-between realm with him, not knowing the former was actually friendly with the Titans. Still, despite being forced to watch his son grow up from a far distance, he granted Luz the power she needed to defeat defeat Belos once and for all, making him an essential part of the grand finale. He even gave his boy one last bread pun to give him both closure and laughter, proving himself to be a pretty good dad even from a ridiculously long distance. Next is the leader of the Bard Coven, Rain Whispers. This old friend of Ida's has always been a big supporter of wild magic, and while both of them were out to create a more free world for the rest of which kind, Rain had a more lawful approach to it. By becoming the head witch of the Bard Coven and the founder and leader of Bards Against the Throne, BATS for short, they planned to sabotage the government itself to liberate witches who didn't want to be forced into joining a coven. As the danger of the Day of Unity became more clear, so did Rain's efforts become more determined. Not only did Rain fake being brainwashed to try and protect Ida from all the drama, but used the last moments of consciousness on the Day of Unity to cut off Ida's infected arm to save her life, keeping a promise to a special kid in the process. Rain is a vigilante who never gave up on an important cause, even when it got really tough, and that gains Rain a lot of our respect.
I'm just that good.
Now let's move on to Luz's first Hexside friend, Willow Park. A soft-spoken girl with a heart of gold, Willow's whole arc is all about confidence, more specifically about regaining confidence. Confidence that was slowly but surely beaten out of her by a lack of talent and a reluctantly treacherous best friend.
I have to go disappoint my teacher.
But thankfully regained over the course of the series. After Luz and her became friends, she comes out of her shell and becomes a skilled athlete and a pretty powerful plant witch, helping to stop Emperor Belos and acting as a reliable friend to the people around her. Really, the worst we could say about Willow is that she sometimes tends to neglect her own needs in favor of others, but if anything, that emphasizes her kindness more, like when she first met Gus and talked him through a panic attack, which helped him learn some new breathing techniques that Gus himself would later pass on to Hunter. Speaking of which, the show must go on, with Gus Porter in our next spot. This little guy turned less little guy, you know, witch puberty and all that, is Luz and Willow's best friend, and he's every bit as kind-hearted and helpful. If anything, Gus's loyalty to his friends is pretty much his core character trait. He's often taken advantage of due to his trust in others, one example being the aforementioned panic attack brought about by him being manipulated by some bullies into doing their homework. As a result of this, and the magic world looking down on illusionists in general, bigots, he's a bit insecure about his magic, but he does all he can to help others. He's also very forgiving, being the first of the Hex Squad to become good friends with Hunter after helping him through an anxiety episode similar to one he himself experienced. He can be impulsive and a bit ruthless with his thinking, like when he tricked Luz into thinking her ban was lifted at Hexside so he could prove himself to the club. But it's plain to see this guy wouldn't hurt a fly.
You did, Gus. You're smartest. You're the best.
Neither would Luz's mother, Camila Noceda. No matter what some fans might have you believe, the Owl House has all kinds of parents, ranging from great to absolutely horrendous, and Camila is one of the better ones. Having been a weird kid herself, Camila was always ready to go to bat for her daughter when others disrespected her. She did ultimately relent in sending Luz to summer school due to her repeatedly getting into trouble, but while this wasn't a great decision, it was the best thing she knew to do at the time, especially given how both she and Luz were struggling with the death of Luz's dad. Ultimately, she ends up apologizing for not accepting Luz the way she was, and even helps in the fight against Belos, going into the demon realm with her, despite not having magic powers of her own. That's some serious committed parenting, and I really think she deserves more credit for it. A quick mention of the youngest members of the Boiling Isles' population is in order, like Braxus. He's notable for being,
Goodbye, Miss Amity. Thank you.
You know what? I think this scene says all that needs to be said about him. It's rare for a character to have me so endeared, so creeped out, and so hysterical all at the same time. Thank you, Braxus. From a boy to his favorite storytime reader, next is Amity Blight. At first, Amity was your typical mean girl archetype. She was stuck up, condescending, and just outright rude with a serious superiority complex to match. But while an explanation isn't the same as a justification, it's worth remembering that Amity had a pretty rough upbringing. She had a dad who neglected her emotionally, a mother who abused her emotionally, and used her as a literal punching bag for her empire, more on that later, and was even forced to cut ties with her childhood best friend Willow because she wasn't talented enough to associate with more refined families. Ultimately, Amity manages to overcome her past and becomes a genuinely great person in spite of her blood. Not only is she the type of girl who volunteers in her spare time, like reading stories to kids at the library, but she's the kind who will ultimately stand up against injustice to her last breath. She risked her life to protect Luz from Prometheus, made amends with Willow, and cut ties with her bullying partners at Hexside, and ultimately played a pivotal role in taking down Belos in the end. It's one of the best character arcs in a show that's full to the brim with amazing character arcs, so Amity's earned a pretty high spot despite a pretty low beginning. We're also gonna give her the Lost Sinner medal because, like, she had a full 180 on Luz. The I'm going to kill you to I'm going to kiss you pipeline is strong with this one. Following Luz's girlfriend is her best friend. Here we have the next resident of the titular Owl House, King Clawthorn. As hard as it was to get used to Bill Cipher's voice coming out of such a goofy little furball, King clawed his way into everyone's hearts pretty quickly. He was convinced at first that he was the legendary King of Demons, whose crown of power was stolen, transforming him into an adorable shell of his former self, which up until this point was pretty much centered around garnering whatever praise, fear, and other kinds of of reverence he could get, be it as tame as taking offerings at a convention, or as extreme as forcefully usurping a playground slide, or bringing stuffed animals to life just to bully them at a boot camp. King earns the Sloth Center Medal for his love of sleeping, snacking, and being served, but thankfully, those kinds of games are as bad as he ever gets.
Excuse me, we're having a moment here.
In actuality, that adorable shell of King's former self was his actual self. King has a straight-up identity crisis when he learns that he isn't actually a king of demons, nor even a demon at all, forcing him to rethink his priorities. And when it's briefly thought that King is the Titan himself, he realizes he doesn't even want people to fear him like some ruthless leader. The little guy never wanted sacrificial offerings, he just wanted offerings of love and attention, and to discover who he really wants to be in life. As the show goes on, King becomes more aware of who he wants to be, and becomes more outwardly caring and selfless. Let's not forget his role in the final few episodes, where he risks his life to make sure Luz can return to the human world, and was one of the first people to suggest that the Collector is a scared kid rather than just an outright villain. Titan Jr. here is a pretty great character, and we'd loaf to put him higher, but you know, the stuffed animal war crimes and all that. From one iconic sidekick to another, next up is Owlbert. As Ida's palisman, Owlbert is a man of few words. In fact, he's not a man, and he doesn't say any words. Owlbert is just, well, he's Owlbert. He helps Ida with whatever she needs and is shown to have a mind of his own. While we can't really say anything bad about Owlbert, we also can't really call him more heroic than the characters ahead of him on the list, so here he stands, or perches. The last of the OG Owl House residents, infamous Wild Witch Ida Clawthorn, is up next. Ida is the Grunkle Stan of the Owl House.
You look rather familiar.
No I don't. Distraction spell.
Acting as the morally flexible summer vacation parental figure to the main characters. Despite being an outlaw, though, Ida is surprisingly pretty firmly good. She isn't an outlaw for some horrific war crimes or anything, but for simply not wanting to join a coven, which history would show was absolutely the right call to make. Ida can be selfish and standoffish, but it comes less from a place of cruelty and more from a place of not wanting to hurt anyone due to the owl beast she's been cursed with. Considering her trauma from accidentally clawing out her father's eye due to said curse, that's a totally valid reason to be antisocial. It also explains why she seems to have a bit of an affinity for apple blood, for which we'll give her the Gluttony Sinner Medal. As much of a troublemaker as Ida always has been,
You want my advice? Walk into class and punch the first kid you see.
she's ultimately willing to put others above herself and work towards the greater good. From sheltering King as a baby to relenting to Luz's request to learn magic at Hexside so she could come to her own conclusions about organized magic usage. There was even the time where she surrendered in the duel she was in with Lilith to join the Emperor's Coven, which, yeah, we'll get back to that. For now, let's talk about V. V doesn't really get a lot of time in the spotlight, which is a shame because her subplot is actually super interesting. She's a creature called the Basilisk, known for its ability to suck magic from other living creatures. After a lifetime of enduring torturous experiments at the hands of who else but Belos, V escaped to the human realm and turned into a doppelganger of Luz, much to the latter's dismay. Thankfully, once her full story is explained, V's identity theft becomes a lot more sympathetic even to her own victim. She ends up being a major help to the gang in fighting Belos during the final season, and she ultimately didn't cause enough harm to place her any lower despite her missteps. We've decided to give the Golden Guard Hunter a higher spot than last time. Easily one of our personal favorites, Hunter had the most impressive redemption arc in a series full of good ones. Introduced as Belos' steadfast second in command in season 2, Hunter quickly showed there was more to him than meets the eye, way more. Starting with his adorable bond with Flapjack. From that point onward, we start to find out more about Hunter. We learn that he was raised by Belos, allowing him to be emotionally manipulated. Then we eventually learn that Hunter was a clone of Belos' brother, marking him up as nothing more than a disposable tool to his old man. And finally, most importantly, we learn that Hunter is, for some reason, terrified of disappointing Belos even after starting to suspect that he's not a good guy. I wonder why? Who would be scared of Belos?
Long story short, this is my grave. Want me to make you one too?
Thankfully, with the power of birdship and soon-to-be friendship on his side, Hunter is able to eventually see the light. With Luz's help, he discovers Belos' true nature while inside of his mind, and despite being quite reasonably horrified at this revelation, he still comes out of it a better person, determined to make a better life for himself and the people around him. After hitting rock bottom, he befriends Gus while seeking shelter at Hexside, which ultimately leads to the squad accepting him as a new member, and Hunter helping to take down Belos once and for all. It's a really touching redemption arc for a character who could have easily gone even further off the deep end. There's just something about psychologically tormented teenagers finding redemption that goes hand in hand with good animation. He even grew up to be a palisman craftsman in honor of Flapjack. What a softie. Darius and Eberwolf are a package deal, so they fit right into this next spot. While they are among the many, many people guilty of working for Emperor Belos, it's worth noting that they were also among the many who suspected something wasn't quite right about him. Darius in particular earns a lot of points. Sure, he initially seemed like a bad guy given his willingness to kidnap Rain and wipe out seemingly anyone who got in his way, but It later turned out that he was plotting against the Emperor from the beginning, having witnessed him kill the previous Golden Guard. These two play a pivotal role in Hunter's redemption arc, encouraging him to become a better person through tough love, basically acting as the Uncle Iroh to his Zuko. What cements their position in the good category is their dedication to protecting the throne from corrupt witches who want to usurp it for themselves, as shown in the finale, helping to ensure that another Belos won't rise up again. Now, let's give a quick mention to Mr. and Mrs. Clawthorne, Ida and Lilith's parents. Despite how much lore there is to Ida and Lilith, we don't really see much of their folks. All we know is that they seem to be decent, supportive, albeit flawed parents. Their best deeds are being decent, functional members of society who occasionally work towards the greater good. Their worst deeds are being somewhat neglectful towards their children's emotional needs, an aspect they apologize for later on. So, yeah, not too much to discuss here. From two minor characters to one more, Viney is up next. Viney is best known for her role on Luz's first day at Hexside, where she joined her in the no longer existent detention track. After some typical magical shenanigans, Viney is placed in Principal Bump's recycling bin. A detention track where troublemakers are kept from learning magic, at least traditionally. Viney was determined to keep her education going though, studying with her classmates in secret and even helping to protect the school from a wild basilisk. She's one of the many characters who could have used a lot more screen time, but from what we saw, she's another addition to this series' roster of golden-hearted delinquents. On a similar note are Amity's older siblings, Edric and Amira Blight. You'd be forgiven for seeing these two as total jerks at first, since, well, they honestly were. Their first appearance in the show sees them pulling pranks on Amity at her place of work during, mind you, the first time Amity was shown to have any nuance besides being a typical mean girl, and this ultimately culminates in them trying to read her diary and post it online. To make a bad sin into a worse one, they pull Luz into it despite her reservations and blame her for it. Thankfully though, they do apologize for this in their next appearance, and from then on, when they reappear, they usually come across as good people willing to help others however they can. Teasing is about as bad as it gets with these two, so they won't lose too many points. Nearing the end of the good category is the headmaster of Hexside, Principal Bump. In his earlier appearances, Bump was a character who screamed gray area. Seriously, don't you guys remember that one episode where it was just him screaming the words gray area on repeat for 22 minutes? No? Okay, maybe it was just a too much apple blood night. In any case, Bump was in need of a few chill pills at the beginning of the show.
Only 300 years until retirement.
His idea of detention loses him the most points, as he basically casts his students to the side by either brainwashing troublemakers into being good students in a detention pit, or having them placed in a track where they weren't even allowed to learn at all. Despite some pretty severe missteps though, Bump still just barely scrapes by as a good guy for one reason: he cares about his students. He earned the absolute raddest statue in Hexside history for his willingness to risk his life to protect the students from the Day of Unity, giving them shelter during the event and covering them however he could. Even in his younger years, when his job wasn't fully set in stone yet, he still seemed to sincerely care about his students' well-being. When he was forced to go with Ida to Ifwat, he was willing to go as far as rebelling against Coven head Terra Snapdragon when he suspected her trials were too dangerous. He ends off the series as a peaceful gardener, which, honestly, that's a super well-earned rest. Only 296 more years till full retirement. Similarly, just barely scraping by as a good character is Ida's sister Lilith Clawthorne to round out the fully good category. As her spot might indicate, Lilith has easily the most unsavory rap sheet on our list so far. As a teenager, she sabotaged her own sister's chances of getting into the Emperor's Coven, which resulted in her being cursed for decades after the fact. To her credit, Lilith did spend her time in the Coven under the idea that she'd be rewarded with having Ida's curse healed, but that wouldn't have even been necessary if she didn't have her cursed in the first place. We're only giving Lilith a good category spot because of just how far she went to make up for what she'd done. She apologizes profusely to Ida, helps Luz to rescue her from the Emperor's Coven, and despite her former devotion to them, she was more than happy to fight against them with her family once she realized how bad they truly were. But the most important good deed of Lilith is one we probably don't even have to say. She's the first person who actually treated Hootie like a friend, and our hearts will be forever warmed by her actions. Hoot hoot! But this next category has a bit less of that mushy gushy stuff and a bit more of that oh yikes stuff. This is the gray area. First up, let's talk about the Boiling Isles' local palisman enthusiast, the Bat Queen. Her first impression, if you could call it that, wasn't exactly the greatest. Leaving her kids in the care of Ida without notifying her ahead was a bit of a risky move that I think we all should have questioned a little bit more.
Fresh meat.
Regardless, she makes up for that by the fact that she's an altruistic, caring figure on the whole. Being a discarded palisman herself, or would that be Pal's woman? Whatever. She takes care of others who have been abandoned, only giving them back to their owners when they prove themselves trustworthy. She goes a bit too far at times, but she does good work and means well, which earns her a relatively high spot on our list. I don't know about you guys, but Tinilla Nosa looks kind of familiar to me.
Peter, this is worse than the time my head got shrunken down and turned into an endearing recurring character on the Owl House.
Really though, she's only only in the gray area for the fact that she's one of those characters who doesn't do much in terms of good nor bad deeds. She's an excellent author, apparently, given the fact that Piñe immediately let up on Luz and King after reading her draft. She's just living her best life, not to mention her devotion to her belief that the world is a triangle.
I think the world is a triangle!
Hey, at least she's being creative. On the topic of being creative, next we have the Collector. This kid made quite the first impression, seemingly wiping out Belos in a single blow after finally being set free. He's actually, weirdly terrifying, having the mind of a child combined with the powers of a god, turning random humans and witches into puppets to use as playthings. But, as Luz and King suspected, the Collector wasn't actually a villain, he was just a lonely child looking for someone to play with, and he didn't fully grasp the harm that his actions were causing people. This is proven point blank when Luz teaches him about the power of love and forgiveness, which he decides to use against Belos. No, please don't do that. Oh dear. When Luz temporarily dies to save him, the Collector is horrified at the fact that his actions have consequences, which truly makes him the most relatable character in the show, and leads to him having a pretty sick redemption arc by saving his puppetified victims and helping to defeat Belos once and for all. Next up is Salty, the bounty hunter captain from season 2. This salty sea dog, walrus, bird creature,
Don't be a burden, sea squirt.
is one of the many characters working for the Golden Guard at first. He's sort of like the Bat Queen in that he's a lot nicer than he appears at first. Despite initially underestimating Luz, he was willing to admit that he was wrong about her when she proved to be a strong fighter and a hard worker. And later, when they were long since done with their job together, he helped her and the gang out by searching for the truth about the Titan. Salty is more or less just a regular guy doing his job, so despite his job involving some dirty work, we feel the need to give him a relatively high spot because things are about to get a lot more ambiguous. Moving on to the more questionable gray area entries, next up is Amity's father, Alador Blight. I'll start off by acknowledging that this dude is by far the better of Amity's parents, which I will further acknowledge isn't saying much considering his competition. While Alador has a pretty decent redemption in the second season, helping the kids take down Emperor Belos once and for all, even being willing to go against his domineering wife to do so.
This is too much, even for you.
We can't say that it erases all of his earlier wrongdoings. Let me explain. Before Amity calling him out for being neglectful due to constantly working rather than spending time with her, Alador had few reservations with Odalia's abusive parenting decisions, from forcing Amity to break off close friendships to using her as a straight-up testing dummy for their security abominations. Whether he approved of them or not, he did let them happen, and that caused his daughter a lot of harm.
Stupid Alador, stupid!
He did become a way better person, and once he realized how horrible of a person Belos was, it gave him the courage to stand up against his wife and ultimately help out on the side of good. But while he proved himself a decent man and father, he still has a long way to go to fully redeem himself. Still, like Amity said, it's a start, and that hug they shared towards the end of the series proves that he's on the right path so far. His full name is Matt Tholomule, but you can call him Matholomule or Man-Tholomule. No? Yeah, I'm sure he expected that. It's cool though, manly or not, Matt went from one of the biggest jerks at Hexside to a pretty decent dude.
'Cause you guys are losers!
While he made a bad first impression by trying to usurp Gus's role as the Human Appreciation Club's president, he proved himself to not be all bad when he helped Gus stand up against their bullies at the Looking Glass ruins, and even helps clean it up from then on out, becoming good friends with Gus in the process. While he's still an egotist and a total dork, he's much nicer than he used to be, welcoming those seeking shelter to Hexside and treating them with some level of care and respect while still hyping himself up plenty. What an absolute mood.
Did you ever have any doubt in your mind?
Nearing the end of the gray area, let's talk about the Emperor's Coven Guards, or as we like to call them, insert generic henchmen here. There isn't much to say about these guys except for the fact that they're more than happy to carry out Belos' orders no matter how violent and ruthless they might be. While some of them are less one-dimensional than others, like my main man Steve, most of them seem to just be allying themselves with a powerful guy who presumably pays well. There are way more interesting baddies to talk about, so let's not waste much time on the old no-names here. Oh, never mind. Next is another no-name. Private New Guy is a character I imagine most of us forgot about. That is, unless you're Hootie. But when King decided to bring stuffed animals to life just to force them to do his bidding at a pseudo boot camp, I feel like the worldwide audience was universally aware of just how bad of an idea this was. Ultimately, it blows up in King's face when New Guy here plots to revolt against King and turn the tables, and while two wrongs don't make a right, I'd be pretty ticked off if I gained sentience just to be used as a free snack delivery service, especially not being allowed to have even one of those snacks. Closing out the gray area, we have the Owl Beast, also known as the manifestation of Ida's curse. Originally, the Owl Beast acted as a chaotic plague on Ida's body and mind, occasionally taking her over to become a complete monster with no semblance of her former self. This resulted in Ida accidentally clawing out one of her father's eyes as a child, which was a trauma that greatly hindered her capability to connect with others years later. All of that sounds like pretty cut and dry bad to evil stuff, right? But it turns out that the owl beast, like Ida, just wanted to be free. Once they understand each other a bit more, Ida's able to use her curse as a powerful blessing that helps her throughout the final season, even if it wouldn't have hurt for the beast to make it a little easier for her to go into harpy mode. But with that, we've reached the end of the characters with any semblance of purity left. These are the bad to evil. Okay, I'll admit that description for this section was kinda harsh, just like Basha. Originally one of Amity's orbiters, Basha was cast out of her life along with the rest of Amity's disdain towards others. She proceeds to go through basically zero character development throughout the series, remaining as a mean girl who just serves to say something snarky and rude to another character. The only real redemptive quality she has is caring about her teammates, and while that's nice, even jerks can care about their friends and still be jerks. Kicking off our bottom 10 is Jacob Hopkins. While he doesn't have enough time nor malice to consider him nearly as bad as the remaining characters, that doesn't make Jacob here any less of a jerk. Conspiracy theorists in animation are quite a varied bunch. For every Okarun and Dib Membrane, there's a Mr. Crocker and a Jacob Hopkins. Hopkins isn't out to save humanity from which kind or anything. He's out to get glory and honor by proving his own delusions right, and to finally get his MewTube account verified.
I'll expose your vile plans on MewTube.
The dude doesn't seem like he's out to genuinely hurt anyone though, and he is convinced that witches want to harvest human teeth for their magical time machines, so yeah, we'll just call this an insanity plea and move on. Next up we have the series' iconic villain. Yes, I'm of course talking about the infamous, the diabolical Tibbles. Tibbles is like, honestly, the only way I can think of to describe this guy is like putting Gideon from Gravity Falls and Wario in a blender. He may look friendly and unassuming enough, but don't let that fool you. This pig is a scammer through and through, and will do everything from counterfeiting books to hustling Ida in a card game to steal King from her to make a quick buck. Tibbles here earns the Greed Sinner medal out of sheer desperation to make money in any way possible, and while you gotta respect his determination, you don't have to respect the fact that he's willing to endanger children as revenge for threatening his livelihood. But if you could believe it, even that's just barely enough to let him crack our bottom 10. Following him is the head of the Illusionist Coven, Adrian Gray Vernworth. One of the Emperor's most devoted followers, Adrian's first major appearance lets you know right off the bat the kind of jerk you're dealing with. He tried to trick the students of Hexside into joining covens before the Day of Unity, despite having at least some inkling that things weren't quite right.
It was really poor work.
In the epilogue, he was shown as one of the several corrupt witches trying to claim the throne and bring Belos' good old days back to the limelight, showing that he was more than willing to risk countless lives to seize power for himself. He isn't any lower on the sole basis that he isn't as bad as the remaining characters. Up next, we have another corrupted coven leader, Terra Snapdragon. Head of the Plant Coven, she's another devoted follower of Belos. She's willing to go to any lengths necessary for the sake of retaining her power, even going as far as brainwashing Rain with magic tea to keep the poor bloke in line, or at least thinking she was doing that. What makes Terra worse than Adrian, in our opinion, is the fact that she has an even longer track record of terrorizing young witches. When Ida went to Ifwat in her Hexside years, Terra forced the students to do battle after they'd already passed all their exams, and even then, she refused to give anyone ribbons for their performance, potentially endangering all of their educations except for Rain and Ida, who she promised to put in a good word for. Like Adrian, she also tried to seize power after Belos was defeated, and if her past actions were any indication, it's safe to say she wouldn't have been a much better leader. Landing just outside of our bottom 5, we have Bill and the Titan Trappers. Aside from sounding like a really cool metal band from the 2000s, these guys don't have a lot of cool characteristics. They take King under their wing under suspicion that he's part of their same cult, organization that worships the Collector by sacrificing every Titan to him. Mass murder is already pretty bad, obviously, but what makes it even worse in this case is that they were genuinely starting to see King as a figurative child to the group, yet they were still willing to plot to outright murder him despite knowing from experience that he didn't mean any harm to them. In their defense, they were convinced that Titans were extremely dangerous, mostly through Bill's deception, but no amount of paranoia justifies the amount of bloodshed this group brought about and how quick they were to turn against King. He may have only been a one-time villain, but Pinier was memorable enough to give a spot regardless. This snake, or more of a lizard I guess, was quick to strike a deal with the newly famous author King, expecting great things out of his work in the future. Except, well, when we say expecting, we more or less mean demanding under penalty of death. When King expresses a desire to quit, Pinier shows his true colors by trapping him in a force field that will crush him if he doesn't write a good sequel. And when King reveals that his writing partner was needed to do the job, Pinier had no problem with kidnapping her and going from threatening to crush one child to death to threatening to crush 2 children to death. The only reason he even relented was because he was more impressed by Nosa's writing, so we can't even give him points for that. The most credit Pinier gets is that he isn't quite as bad as Kikimora, Emperor Belos' right-hand woman, or rather, left pinky toe woman. Despite wanting to please the Emperor and get in his good graces, Kiki's hard work was never really appreciated, to the point where she visibly hated anyone who got higher positions than her, particularly the Golden Guards. Kiki earns a pretty easy NP Center medal for that attitude. Her whole shtick is just seeking power any way she can. What makes Kikimora's arc hurt all the more is the fact that she had the potential to redeem herself. Luz reaching out to comfort her convinced her to join the side of good in one episode, but it ultimately fell flat when she saw an opportunity to creep her way back into Belos' inner circle, and that too fell flat when Belos basically told her to go ask Hunter to dig a nice grave for her.
Go find a hole to wither away in.
At every turn, she had the chance to stop obsessing over power, but she turned all those chances down because she was already too far gone. It sucks, but she made her choice, and that choice makes her one of the most evil characters in the show. But a pretty great secondary antagonist, I'll admit. I absolutely hate putting her higher than she was last time around, but the bronze medal of evil goes to Odalia Blight. She may not be an outright supervillain like the Titan Trappers or Kiki, but I don't think it can be understated how genuinely awful Odalia is. She abuses her children and her husband on a regular basis and places her company above everything else, all for the sake of keeping them on top. When Emperor Belos is outed as a complete monster, Odalia still shows no reservations with selling her products to him, proving that people really are just commodities to her, and that sadly extends to her own children. One detail I haven't seen people mention about her too much is that Odalia literally punishes Amity by forcing her to act as a punching bag for her company's security abominations. Like, I mean, she actually literally says that, point blank, and this was for having a lackluster performance in school. Status means everything to Odalia, so the Pride Center medal couldn't go to anyone more fitting. Unlike Kiki, we don't see even a hint of sympathetic characteristics in Odalia, so she's an easy choice for the bottom three. But we did forget one particularly memorable monster last time around. But first, this video is brought to you by Wicked Binge channel memberships. You can gain access to our videos early before anyone else, plus gain access to members-only emojis and loyalty badges by supporting the channel through a membership. Prometheus the Fearbringer is our runner-up of evil, even though it only appeared in one episode. Like, come on, dude. It's a monster that literally manifests its opponent's worst fears and comes out once a year to try and escape captivity and spread fear throughout the Isles. We don't know much of anything about Grom's origins or motives either. All we know is that once a year, for who knows how long, it gains power and uses it to spar against a literal randomly selected child to determine whether or not it can do its thing or whether it's got to wait until next year. Like, dude, just let it go already. I don't think I've ever heard a better case for the Wrath Center medal. The only thing keeping Agrami here from taking the top spot is that, well, again, we don't know about its origins. Plenty of good people in the Owl House, like Hunter, Ida, and Lilith, were briefly turned into something entirely different due to outside manipulation. Who's to say Grom isn't the same way? Plus, without him, we wouldn't have that super well animated dance scene between Luce and Amity, so we have to give him some credit. Alright. Okay, you want the real reason? You could argue Prometheus is the objective most evil character, but with a main antagonist as vile as Emperor Belos, it'd feel wrong not to acknowledge him with our gold medal of evil. Belos is an absolute monster in every sense of the word. Ironically though, he used to be just our regular guy, sorta. Philip Wittebane was a witch hunter raised in a culture taught to fear magic in all of its forms back in the early 1600s, and through some Titan blood shenanigans, he ended up trapped in the demon realm along with his brother, who ended up falling in love with a witch. So Philip took that personally and ultimately ended up killing his brother out of rage, only to keep cloning him ad nauseum to do his bidding. And those are just his crimes against humanity, mind you. Belos' treatment of witches is way worse, as even after finding out that they're more similar to humans than anyone thought, not to mention having zero ill will towards them, Belos still took it upon himself to seize power and manipulate the Boiling Isles into believing he was a messenger of the Titan to keep everyone in line and obedient to his, the Titan's will. What makes Belos easily the most evil character in the show, aside from like everything else about him, is tied to what makes him such a good villain. He hits a lot of the marks of a good Disney villain. He has traits that could be considered sympathetic: guilt over killing his own brother, being raised in a culture that groomed him into fearing all sorts of magic, and even a simple desire to get back to the human realm after he finishes his witch hunt. But what makes him such a great antagonist is the fact that this show never uses this to try and make him sympathetic. Belos is consistently a lying scumbag who uses everyone, be they witches, demigods, or a literal human child, as a means to an end. He takes pleasure in using others as tools and will cast them aside both physically and emotionally as soon as they stop being useful to him. Also, it's his fault Flapjack died, so yeah, most evil by default.